There is a question that Japanese women start asking after 50, and it completely changes what comes into their home. It isn't, "Do I need this?" It is, "Does this serve the life I am actually living?" Right now, when the question changes, everything changes. 12 categories leave the list. Here is what takes their place. 12. Clothing that requires special care. There is a specific type of garment that occupies a disproportionate amount of mental space relative to the number of times it is actually worn. The dry clean only dress that has been to the dry cleaner twice in 3 years, both times for events significant enough to override the friction of the process. The hand wash only silk blouse that requires reading before every cleaning and produces a low-level anxiety about survival each time it's worn. The sweater with care instructions specific enough that the label has been consulted multiple times. The linen suit that wrinkles irreparably if not stored correctly and pressed professionally before every wearing. Each of these garments arrived representing something real. The quality of the material, the beauty of the construction, the elegance of the silhouette in the store where it was not yet a care problem. Japanese women in their 50s move away from this category with striking regularity, not because they become indifferent to quality, but because they arrive at a more precise understanding of what quality actually means in daily use. The Japanese concept of minge, folk craft, objects made for actual daily use, applies here with specific clarity. An object that demands more from you than it gives you is not a high-quality object regardless of its price, its materials, or its craftsmanship. The silk blouse that cannot be worn freely, because wearing it means managing it, is a blouse with a negative net contribution to the life it was supposed to enhance. The garment that requires special care produces a specific and measurable friction every time it is reached for. Before putting it on, is this the right occasion for the care that follows? After wearing it, the immediate sequence of spot checking, careful removal, appropriate storage, scheduling of cleaning, this friction, repeated across years, is not dramatic. It is the consistent, low-level cost of owning something that is designed for performance rather than for living. The replacement is not cheaper clothing. It is not less beautiful clothing. It is clothing with what Japanese women in this phase reliably describe as real wearability, the quality of being genuinely reachable on any morning for any occasion within its reasonable range, without the calculation of whether today justifies the maintenance that follows. Washable linen, machine-washable wool, cotton that dries without ironing if removed from the wash promptly, fabrics that go through a regular cycle and emerge ready to wear. These are not compromises. In the context of a full life in its most active and engaged phase, these are the standard for what clothing is worth owning. What the Japanese post-50 wardrobe reveals again and again is that the clothing most worn is almost never the clothing that requires the most care. It is the clothing that can be put on and forgotten, that does its work so naturally it disappears. The garment that asks nothing of you while you wear it is the garment that gets worn. The garment that asks something is the garment that gets managed. The shift toward washable, wearable, frictionless clothing is not a lowering of standards. It is the application of a more demanding standard than the one applied before. One that counts daily wearability as the primary measure of a garment's value, above all others. When this shift is made, when the clothing requiring special care exits and the clothing that can actually be worn daily enters, the wardrobe becomes smaller and more useful simultaneously. Every piece in it is available. Nothing in it is being preserved. The closet can be opened every morning without the quiet arithmetic of what today's agenda justifies wearing. 11. Multi-ingredient skincare. Walk through the skincare aisle of any pharmacy and you will find products whose ingredient lists require translation. Peptides, retinoids, hyaluronic acid derivatives, niacinamide, bakuchiol, ceramides, 17 active compounds in a single serum, each addressing a different dimension of what the marketing identifies as the problem. Japanese women in their 50s, reliably and by a wide margin, move in the opposite direction. This is not a move toward cheaper products or simpler products out of resignation or reduced investment in self-care. It is a move toward fewer active ingredients out of a more accurate understanding of what the skin at this stage of life actually requires and what it does not. The dermatological basis for this shift is clear. Skin in the 50s has a different barrier function than skin in the 30s. The sebaceous activity has changed. The cell turnover rate has changed. The capacity to tolerate and benefit from high-concentration actives has changed. Products formulated with multiple high-potency actives designed for the regenerative biology of younger skin frequently overprocess mature skin, stripping the barrier function that becomes increasingly important in this decade rather than strengthening it. The specific Japanese post-50 skincare approach that emerges from this understanding is characterized by a short, precisely calibrated routine, a gentle oil cleanser that removes without stripping, a hydrating essence, often based on fermented ingredients, a long-established Japanese practice with genuine evidence behind it, with minimal additional actives, a sunscreen. This is frequently the complete routine, not a foundation to which more is added, a complete sufficient practice. The products that leave the purchasing list in this transition are those with multiple active ingredients marketed as multi-targeting, the serums that address 7 concerns simultaneously, the treatments that promise cellular regeneration alongside barrier repair, alongside brightening, alongside firming. Not because these concerns are not real, but because the product addressing all of them simultaneously is almost certainly addressing none of them optimally, and the skin receiving them daily is receiving a complex chemical environment it does not need. There is a financial dimension to this shift that is worth naming clearly. Multi-active, multi-claim skincare is among the most expensive skincare available. A routine built around 3 simple, high-quality products costs significantly less than a routine built around 7 targeted treatments. The simplification is not a financial downgrade. It is the natural consequence of no longer purchasing complexity for its own sake. What the post-50 Japanese skincare practice demonstrates, routine after routine, is that the skin responds better to less active input and more fundamental support: the fermented essence, the thorough sunscreen, the gentle cleanser. The skin that is not being constantly treated recovers its own barrier function more reliably than the skin being continuously managed with interventions. Japanese women describe this transition as one of the most immediately satisfying of the post-50 simplifications. Not because the skin immediately improves in every dimension, but because the daily practice becomes simpler, less expensive, and more consistent. Consistency being, as it turns out, the variable with the most impact on long-term skin condition. 10. Furniture bought for how it photographs. There is a category of furniture purchase that makes complete sense in the store and in the images that populate home design publications, and reveals its actual cost within the first months of living with it. The coffee table with the silhouette that photographs beautifully and the sharp corners that require navigating carefully in a normal-sized room. The decorative chair that exists in the living room with the specific presence that a well-designed chair has in a magazine image and is never sat in because the experience of sitting in it does not match the experience of looking at it. The open shelving unit whose emptiness looks clean and modern and requires a specific arrangement and maintenance of that arrangement to remain looking like it does in the photograph that inspired its purchase. Japanese women past 50 become noticeably less interested in this category, and the shift shows up again and again. It is not sudden or philosophical. It accumulates from experience. By the 5th decade of furnishing, refurnishing, moving, and refurnishing again, the gap between how something looks and how something lives has been encountered enough times to be recognized reliably at the point of purchase rather than discovered afterward. The chair that is beautiful to look at and uncomfortable to sit in is identifiable in the store now. The back angle is slightly off. The seat depth does not quite match the body. The material will not age the way the image suggested it would. The Japanese concept that applies here is rooted in Minge, the philosophy of the folk craft, objects made for daily use by the people who will use them, whose beauty emerges from the precision of that fit rather than from design for its own sake. The table that is exactly the right height for the body that sits at it and exactly the right material for the cleaning it will receive is a beautiful table. Its beauty is functional rather than decorative, which means it does not require staging to be felt. Post-50 Japanese furniture purchasing tends toward what might be called honest simplicity, the piece that makes no claim beyond its function, that does its job without theater, that is easy to maintain, easy to move, easy to live with. The low table that can be repositioned for different uses. The storage that opens and closes without ceremony. The chair that is actually unreservedly sat in. The visual of the Japanese home in this phase of life is not minimal in the sense of absence. It is minimal in the sense of precision, a space edited toward function so completely that the function itself creates the atmosphere, the calm of a room where nothing is asking to be noticed and everything is simply, dependably working. What stops being purchased is the furniture that represents how a life looks rather than how it is lived. A specific and well-established Japanese interior sensibility holds that the room which is fully inhabited, where the objects present are present because they are used, where the surfaces are clear because nothing is stored on them without purpose, has an atmosphere that is simply not achievable through styling. It is achieved by subtraction, done repeatedly over years. 9. Gifts bought out of obligation. Gift-giving in Western culture operates largely through the logic of occasion. The birthday requires a gift. The holiday requires a gift. The housewarming, the graduation, the thank you. Each occasion carries its corresponding gift expectation, and the gift is purchased at speed in response to the occasion rather than in response to the recipient. This produces a specific category of purchase. The placeholder gift, the generic candle bought because something was needed, the standard chocolate selected because chocolate is safe, the item from the airport gift shop because there was no other time and an arrival without something felt inadequate, the gift card purchased because a real gift could not be identified in the available time. These purchases are made in genuine good intention. They are not cynical. They reflect a real desire to honor the relationship, to participate in the occasion, to communicate care. The failure is not in the intention, but in the method, in the substitution of speed and obligation for thought. Japanese women past 50 move away from this category, and the shift is hard to miss once you notice it. It is not toward giving less. It is toward a different understanding of what giving actually communicates. Japanese gift culture carries within it the concept of ki wo tsukao, paying careful attention to another person. The gift in Japanese tradition is not primarily an object. It is evidence of attention, of having noticed something specific about the recipient and having responded to what was noticed. The gift bought under time pressure in response to an occasion produces, at best, a pleasant surprise. The gift chosen because of something specific the recipient mentioned, or needs, or would genuinely value, produces something different. It produces the experience of being known. Post-50 Japanese women are more likely to give time than objects. A meal cooked and shared, a visit made specifically for the person, a phone call at the moment it would mean the most. And when objects are given, they are given with specificity that reflects genuine attention. The book the recipient mentioned wanting, the item that solves a specific problem that was described, the experience tailored to a known preference. This shift also involves a renegotiation of the accumulated gift exchange agreements that build across decades of adult relationships. The mutual gift exchange that both parties have continued for 15 years out of established habit rather than current desire, and that neither party particularly needs or wants to maintain, but that neither has raised because raising it seems ungracious. Japanese women past 50 raise it, not ungraciously, with the honesty that this phase of life tends to produce. The conversation, more often than not, produces relief on both sides, and the relationship, freed from the obligation, is often closer for it. What stops being purchased is the gift as social transaction. What continues, with more deliberateness and more genuine pleasure, is giving as an expression of specific chosen care for a specific known person. 8. Anything bought because it's on sale. The sale is one of the most effective distortions of purchasing logic available in consumer culture. Its mechanism is simple and reliable. It replaces the question, "Do I need this?" with the question, "Is this a good deal?" And a good deal on something that does not serve the life actually being lived is not a deal. It is an acquisition with a discount applied. The psychological power of the sale is well established. Loss aversion, the documented human tendency to respond more strongly to potential losses than to equivalent potential gains, is activated by a sale. The original price sets a reference point. The discounted price offers the perception of money saved from that reference point. Failing to purchase feels, in the moment, like losing the difference between the original and discounted price. The purchase feels like a gain, but the gain is only real if the item purchased genuinely serves its purpose. An item purchased at 50% off and used 3 times before being donated is a full-price purchase of what was used and a payment for the storage and eventual logistics of what was not. Japanese women past 50 step back from sale responsiveness in a way that shows up clearly across the decade. Not because they become indifferent to the cost of things, often the opposite. The post-50 relationship with money tends toward greater intentionality and precision rather than less. But intentionality and sale responsiveness are structurally incompatible. An intentional purchase is one where the need or genuine desire existed before the sale made the purchase feel urgent. A sale-responsive purchase is one where the sale created the need or the appearance of one. The Japanese Motonai principle, the discomfort with waste, is often invoked in defense of sale purchases. The argument runs, it would be wasteful to miss this deal. But Motonai is not about deals. It is about using what you have fully, about the genuine cost of things that includes their making and their materials, about not discarding things that still have life in them. Motonai applied accurately produces discomfort at the sale purchase that will be used twice and discarded, not at the decision to pass a sale and purchase nothing. The standard that Japanese post-50 purchasing applies to sales is simple. Would this item be purchased at full price for a specific identified use? If the answer is yes, the sale is a genuine benefit. If the answer is no, if the motivation is the discount rather than the item, the sale has created a purchase that serves neither the household nor ultimately the economy of time and attention required to manage what arrives in a home. The wardrobe assembled from careful full-price choices is less expensive over its lifetime than the wardrobe assembled from sales of approximate things. The kitchen stocked with items purchased for specific genuine uses requires less management than the kitchen stocked with items purchased because they were available at a compelling price. What stops being purchased is the deal as a category of consumption. What continues is the deliberate acquisition of what is genuinely needed at whatever price accurately represents its value. 5 items in, and a pattern is emerging. None of these are categories abandoned out of deprivation, reduced resources, or a philosophical commitment to owning less for its own sake. They are categories where, After decades of acquiring and using and eventually releasing, after enough experience with the full cycle of things entering and leaving a life, a clearer picture has formed of what actually serves daily life and what only appears to. Japanese women describe this clarity not as something that arrived suddenly, but as something that accumulated. Each decade brought more information. The 50s bring enough information to act on with confidence. The next 4 are where this becomes most personal. Tell me in the comments which of the first 5 resonated most immediately, the one where you thought, I already know this and I haven't acted on it yet, and keep watching. The final 2 are the most significant. 7. Exercise equipment for exercise not yet happening. The exercise equipment category has a specific relationship with intention that becomes very clear in the post-50 Japanese household, and very clear in most households with any honest assessment. The stationary bike in the spare room, purchased during a period of genuine commitment to changing how the body moves, that has become over 18 months an expensive and very stable garment rack. The resistance bands still in their packaging, unopened, on the shelf beside the foam roller acquired for the stretching routine that has not yet become a routine. The mat purchased for the yoga practice that exists more fully as an intention than as a practice. The intention genuine, the practice hypothetical. Each of these represents a real aspiration. The desire to move the body more, to care for it more deliberately, to build the practices that support long-term physical well-being, this is not trivial. It is among the most important things a person past 50 can do. The aspiration that drives these purchases is not the problem. The problem is a specific and well-recognized error in how the relationship between equipment and habit is understood. The purchase of equipment is experienced as the beginning of a practice. In most cases, it is not the beginning. It is a proxy for the beginning, something that feels like committing to the habit without requiring the actual first instance of the habit itself. Japanese women past 50 who have built lasting movement practices and movement culture in Japan among this demographic is genuinely robust, with walking, swimming, tai chi, and local exercise groups all deeply embedded in daily life, describe the same sequence again and again. The practice first, the equipment following to support a practice already real. Walking before purchasing the shoes designed for serious distance. Stretching on a bare floor before purchasing the mat that makes floor stretching easier. Swimming in a community pool with borrowed equipment before investing in personal equipment for a practice now confirmed as consistent. This sequence produces significantly better equipment purchases when they happen. The person who has been walking 4 mornings a week for 3 months and then chooses walking shoes knows exactly what their foot requires: its width, its arch, the surfaces walked on, the distances covered. The person who purchases walking shoes in January as part of an intention is guessing at the needs of a practice not yet real. It also produces a different relationship with the body and the practice. When movement is the established fact and equipment is the support, the practice does not depend on the equipment. A missed delivery, a worn-out pair of shoes, a temporarily inaccessible gym, none of these end the practice, because the practice is real and the equipment is a convenience. When equipment is purchased before the practice is established, the equipment frequently becomes the reason the practice doesn't begin. The mat is not in the right place. The bike needs adjustment. The resistance bands are confusing without instruction. Each friction point becomes a reason for further delay. And the equipment that was supposed to begin the practice ends up postponing it indefinitely. What stops being purchased is the equipment as motivation, the acquisition that represents the commitment rather than supporting one already made. What is purchased is the equipment as support, practical, specific, chosen for a practice already in motion. 6. Decorative objects that require dusting. There is a specific category of home decor whose primary ongoing cost is not money but time. the time required to move it, clean the surface it occupied, clean the object itself, and return it to its position. This time is small per instance. 20 seconds for the figurine, 30 for the cluster of objects on the shelf, 40 for the arrangement on the windowsill that requires repositioning each piece individually. Small. Multiplied by weekly cleaning across a year, across a decade, across the span of time, an object occupies a surface. It accumulates into a significant portion of cleaning time devoted entirely to objects whose only contribution to the household is their appearance. Japanese women past 50 move away from this category in a way that's easy to recognize once it's pointed out. The reasoning, when examined, has several layers that build on each other. The most immediate is practical. After 50, the question of what time is spent on becomes sharper, not because time is running out in any dramatic sense, but because the sense of it as a finite and genuinely valuable resource becomes clearer. The time spent dusting the decorative figurine that was beautiful when it arrived and has become furniture. Over the years it has occupied the same surface. That time has a different quality now. Not resentment, clarity about its opportunity cost. The deeper layer is aesthetic. The Japanese home, in its most characteristic post-50 expression, tends toward what might be described as earned sparseness. Not empty for the sake of being empty, but space where every visible object is present by deliberate current choice rather than by accumulated history. The object that has been on the same surface for 11 years without being reconsidered is not there by choice. It is there by inertia, which is the absence of choice. The practice of mumei, the intentional empty space in Japanese aesthetics, is not about removing objects. It is about the active decision that space itself has value, that the surface with 2 carefully chosen objects is more present than the surface with 12 that have accumulated over years. The space between objects is not where something is missing. It is where the eye rests, where the room breathes. What leaves the purchasing list, specifically, is the decorative object bought because the surface looked empty, the reflex acquisition that fills space without contributing anything beyond its physical presence. And what becomes the standard for any decorative object that does enter the home is more demanding than before. It must be genuinely beautiful by current assessment or genuinely meaningful by specific connection, and it must earn that space against the alternative of leaving the space empty. The empty space being, as it turns out, not a deficiency, but a choice. 5. Wellness products without evidence. The wellness industry is one of the most effectively designed industries for reaching women in their 50s. It has identified, accurately, that this demographic has genuine health concerns, real interest in long-term well-being, and meaningful purchasing power. And it meets all 3 with products positioned at the intersection of legitimate health language and aspirational promise. The supplement that will support bone density, hormonal balance, cognitive clarity, and energy simultaneously. The device that delivers the therapeutic effects of modalities requiring professional training. The program that promises the outcomes of lifestyle changes without the lifestyle changes. The proprietary formula that works through mechanisms that are, the marketing explains, too complex to detail but have been carefully developed. Each of these arrives speaking the language of health genuinely enough to seem credible. Japanese women past 50 become sharply more selective in this category, and the shift holds up under scrutiny. Not less interested in health, but more precise about what constitutes genuine health investment. The evaluative question that this demographic reliably applies is simple and effective. What is the actual quality of the evidence that this works? Not the testimonials. Testimonials are structurally incapable of establishing causal relationships between a product and an outcome. They report correlation in a single individual without controls, without comparison, without ruling out the dozens of other variables present in that person's life during the period of use. not the before and after photographs. For the same reasons, and additionally because they are selected from the full range of customer experiences to represent the outcomes that support the product's marketing claims, not the scientific-sounding explanation. The presence of scientific vocabulary in a product description is not evidence. It is marketing that borrows the credibility of science without the accountability. The actual evidence, the research design, the independence of the researchers from the company producing and selling the product, the replication of results across independent studies, the peer review process, the effect size relative to control conditions. Most wellness products marketed to women over 50 do not survive this question applied honestly. The evidence base for most specific supplements, for most targeted devices, for most proprietary programs, is thin, preliminary, industry-funded, or absent. The evidence base for the practices that Japanese women in this demographic reliably prioritize: adequate sleep, regular moderate movement, maintained social connection, a diet built substantially around vegetables and fermented foods, management of chronic stress, is extensive, replicated, and independent. What stops being purchased is the product that substitutes for the practice, the supplement taken instead of the dietary change, the device used instead of the movement, the program purchased instead of the lifestyle it claims to produce. What continues is genuine investment in genuine practices, at whatever cost in time and consistency they require. 4. Clothing in sizes that don't fit now. This is the most personal category on this list, and one of the most consistent across Japanese women in their 50s. The clothing bought in a size or a cut that currently doesn't fit, purchased with the implicit contract that the body will change to meet the clothing. The dress kept because it will fit again after the commitment to exercise that has been genuinely made multiple times. The jeans that fit 5 years ago and are stored in the back of the closet because they might fit again. The jacket bought in a smaller size because it was beautiful, and because seeing it daily would motivate the change that would make wearing it possible. Japanese post-50 clothing practice is notable for its precision about the body as it currently is, not as it was, not as it may become, as it is right now in this specific phase of life. This is not resignation. It is a specific form of respect for the body that has been inhabited and used for 50 or more years, for the work it does and has done, for the fact that it deserves clothing that fits it as it is, rather than clothing that fits a hypothetical future version of it that may or may not arrive. The cost of aspirational clothing is real, even when it's rarely named directly. It shows up in a specific, familiar moment. The closet door opens, the piece is right there, and the body standing in front of it doesn't match what the piece requires. That moment is brief. It repeats quietly. Hundreds of times across the years, the piece stays in the closet. A small discomfort, repeated that often, is not nothing. Japanese women past 50 clear this category with a decisiveness that is often described afterward as relief rather than loss. The closet that contains only what fits the actual body right now is a closet that can be opened every morning without that moment. Every option it contains is genuinely available. Every piece can be reached for and worn. The closet serves the body that lives in it rather than the body that once lived in it, or the body that might someday live in it. What stops being purchased is clothing as self-improvement strategy, the piece acquired to motivate the change rather than to serve the current reality. What is purchased is clothing as genuine daily care for the body that is actually present. This reorientation, described the same way by Japanese woman after Japanese woman who has made it, changes not just the wardrobe, but the daily experience of inhabiting the body, from something to be improved toward an aspiration to something to be cared for as it is. 9 items down, 3 to go. This is usually where the list stops feeling like a list and starts feeling personal. The clothing that doesn't fit yet, kept in hope, is one that most people don't actually remove. They just quietly stop opening that section of the closet, which spares the daily comparison but costs a section of the closet permanently to something unworn. The final three go somewhere different. They're less about objects and more about the thinking underneath why the objects keep arriving in the first place. And the last one is the quietest of all, the one that ends up explaining most of what came before it. 3 products that manage things that should be released. This category is the most meta on the list, and possibly the one with the most significant structural impact on a household. The storage solution for the items that should not be stored. The organizational system for the objects that do not deserve to be organized. The additional shelving for the clothing that represents a wardrobe significantly larger than the life actually being lived. The label maker for the drawer whose contents should not exist. Japanese women past 50 become notably attentive to this category and to the specific error it represents. The error is this: when a space is difficult to manage, the instinct in most Western households is to purchase a management tool. The disorganized drawer gets a divider system. The cluttered closet gets additional hanging capacity. The overflowing cabinet gets a shelf insert. The papers that cannot be found get a filing system. Each of these purchases is made in genuine problem-solving mode. Each addresses the symptom, the disorganization, without addressing the cause. The cause is almost always that the category being organized is too large for the life it is supposed to serve. The drawer is difficult to manage not because it lacks structure, but because it contains 3 times as many objects as are actually used from it. The closet is crowded not because it needs more hanging capacity, but because it contains garments for occasions that no longer occur, sizes that no longer fit, and styles from phases of life now past. The cabinet overflows not because it is too small, but because it holds equipment for cooking practices not practiced in the current household. The organizational tool purchased for these categories delays the actual decision indefinitely. It provides a functional home for things that should not be there, which makes them more organized and therefore less urgently problematic, which means the decision of whether they belong here at all is deferred for another year or another 5. Japanese household management in the post-50 phase applies the question in the correct sequence. Before purchasing any organizational tool, the question is whether the category being organized should exist in its current size. This question is asked honestly. The honest answer, typically, is that it should not. After the reduction, after the category has been brought to the size that genuinely serves the current household, the organizational tool purchased for what remains is small, appropriate, precisely chosen, and purchased for a specific identified need. It is a different purchase from the tool bought to manage an unreduced excess. What stops being purchased is the organizer as a substitute for the decision to release. What is purchased occasionally and specifically is the organizer for what has been decided to keep. 2. The next version of something that already exists. Japanese women past 50 move away, distinctly and by wide margin, from a category of purchase that is extremely well designed to be invisible as a category at all. The replacement for the thing that still works. The upgrade of the thing that still functions. The newer version of the thing that is performing its purpose without failure, but is no longer the newest version of itself. This category operates through a mechanism distinct from the aspiration and obligation and sale responsiveness that drive other categories on this list. It operates through the quiet but persistent presence of the new, the slightly better, the slightly updated, the slightly different, and through the equally persistent suggestion that the existing is therefore slightly deficient. The phone that is 18 months old and functions without any meaningful limitation except that it is not the current model. The kitchen appliance that does its job reliably and does not have the connectivity or the interface of the current year's version. The bag, the wallet, the shoes, items in good condition, genuinely functional, not worn out, that are in the presence of new versions of themselves that are slightly updated in design or slightly improved in some specified dimension. Japanese material culture has a deeply embedded relationship with objects that remain in use for extended periods. Mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, a central concept in Japanese aesthetics, does not produce replacement of the functional. It produces appreciation of it. The awareness that the phone working in your hand will someday not work, that the bag being carried will eventually wear out, that the shoes walking these specific floors will eventually walk their last, this awareness, in Japanese application, produces presence with the object rather than anticipation of its replacement. Mottainai, the discomfort with waste, applies here with specific force. An object discarded before its functional life is complete has been wasted. The phone replaced not because it has failed, but because a newer model exists, has been wasted. The environmental and economic cost of its making and its disposal, both real, both significant, were incurred unnecessarily. Post-50 Japanese women describe their relationship with functioning objects as one of genuine appreciation rather than tolerance. The phone that works. The bag that carries what it carries without failing. These are not embarrassments in need of replacement. They are objects in the middle of their functional lives, doing what they were made to do. What stops being purchased is the upgrade of what is not yet finished. What continues is the replacement, when it becomes genuinely necessary, of what has genuinely completed its function. 1. The next solution to the same problem. This is the final item, and it contains all the others. Japanese women past 50 stop purchasing the next solution to a problem that has had many previous solutions. The diet that will work this time, positioned differently than the previous diet, using a different framework, emphasizing different macronutrient ratios or eating windows or food combinations, but addressing the same fundamental challenge that previous diets addressed with results that eventually reverted. The organizational system that will finally produce the lasting order that previous organizational systems produced temporarily and then dissolved. The skincare routine that will address the concern that 15 years of skincare routines have improved incrementally and never resolved. The productivity framework that will unlock the focused, efficient workdays that previous productivity frameworks promised and occasionally delivered in short windows before the old patterns reasserted themselves. Every purchase in these categories is made in genuine hope. This is important to say clearly because the hope is real. The desire for the solution to work is real. The problem the purchase is meant to address is real. The experience of improvement in the early phase of the new solution, which is real and which is produced by the novelty of the new approach, the motivation that accompanies a fresh start, the behavioral changes that accompany any significant change in routine, is real. What is not real is the expectation that this time, with this particular solution, the change will be permanent when previous changes have not been. Japanese philosophy engages the category of persistent challenges differently from the solution purchasing model. The concept of kata, form, the structured repetition of basic practice, until it becomes both automatic and continually deepening, offers a different relationship with difficulty than the solution framework does. Kata does not solve a problem. It builds a relationship with a practice. The relationship, maintained consistently over time, produces change that is qualitatively different from the change produced by a solution, because it is not dependent on the solution's continued novelty and is not vulnerable to the solution's eventual familiarity. The diet that failed multiple times is often not a diet problem. It is a relationship with eating and hunger, and the body signals that no specific dietary framework resolves because the framework is external, imposed on a set of patterns and responses that are internal, and the framework's constraints eventually yield to those internal patterns. The sustained change is not in the framework. It is in the internal relationship with food, which is built slowly and without a specific product. The organizational system that produced temporary order is often not an organizational problem. It is an accumulation pattern, a continuous inflow of objects without a corresponding systematic outflow, that no storage or labeling system resolves, because the system manages the symptom while the pattern continues. The awareness that post-50 Japanese women bring to this category is accumulated. It comes from having been through enough iterations of enough solutions to enough persistent challenges to recognize the category for what it is. And the recognition produces a different question, not which solution will work this time, but what is the actual nature of this challenge and what would a real relationship with it require? What stops being purchased is the solution as the unit of change. What begins, slowly, imperfectly, and without a specific product to purchase, is the practice. The practice, unlike the solution, does not have an expiration date. It does not become familiar in ways that undermine its effect. It does not require replacement when the next version is released. The practice is simply what is done consistently for a long time. And a long time, past 50, is exactly what there is. 12 categories, each one a place where, after decades of acquiring and releasing, a clearer picture formed of what a life actually requires versus what it was sold. What holds true across all 12 is that the release is never described as sacrifice. The women who have stopped buying these things describe the period after as quieter, not emptier, but less burdened by the ongoing management of things that were supposed to help, and mostly didn't. The clothing that can actually be worn, the skin care that actually fits the skin, the gifts that actually reflect the person they're given to, the equipment bought for practices that already exist, the objects that are genuinely beautiful rather than present, the solutions that are actually practices. The life that results from these 12 shifts is not smaller. It is more precisely the life that was always intended, and simply less encumbered by everything purchased in the service of a version of it that was never quite accurate. There is a Japanese principle that comes up again and again in the post-50 accounts of this transition, harahachi bu, see eat until 80% full, not as a diet rule, but as a relationship with satisfaction. The sense that a little less than maximum is, in practice, more comfortable than maximum, that the room left at the edge is not insufficiency. It is the space where ease lives. That principle, applied to acquisition, describes exactly the transition these 12 categories represent. The question that changes everything, does this serve the life I am actually living right now, is not a question about restriction. It is a question about accuracy, and answering it accurately in category after category is what makes everything lighter. Tell me in the comments which of these 12 you've already moved away from and which one you're still working toward. I'll be reading. Subscribe, because every Wednesday and Saturday this channel goes deeper into what Japan figured out about living well. See you next week.